The sun over Dry Creek didn't rise that morning. It burned. Its light poured down like molten brass, baking the dust into the kind of heat that made men squint and women stay indoors. But not today. Today the whole town was out. In the center of the square, tied to the whipping post, stood a woman. Her dress was torn, her back streaked with the cruel marks of the law's rope. The sheriff's hand rested on the handle of his whip, his jaw set like stone. No one spoke. Boots shuffled in the dirt. The air was thick with judgment and something worse. Silence. Her name was Clara Boone. To some she was a thief, to others a liar. But to most she was just another soul caught in the gears of frontier justice. The sheriff raised his arm. The crowd leaned forward. And then, a voice cut through the heat like a bullet through glass. High, trembling, but fierce enough to stop the sheriff mid-swing. "That's my mother." Heads turned. A boy, no older than 10, stood at the edge of the crowd. His hair was wild, his eyes blazing with something no child should carry. Defiance. The sheriff's grip on the whip tightened. The boy took a step forward, and in that moment the town of Dry Creek held its breath. The boy's voice still hung in the air, trembling but unbroken. It was the kind of sound that didn't just interrupt, it split the moment in two. Before it, there had been the steady rhythm of frontier justice, the sheriff's boots planted firm, the crowd's eyes fixed on the woman, the sun pressing down like a sentence from God himself. After it, there was only stillness. Every head turned. Some faces showed surprise, others annoyance. But most carried that guarded look people wear when they know trouble's about to start and they're not sure which side they'll be on. The boy stepped forward again, his bare feet kicking up little puffs of dust. He was thin, all elbows and knees, but there was something in the way he moved, like each step was a dare. His eyes never left the sheriff. "Son," the sheriff said, his voice low and gravelly, "you best go on home. This here's the law's business." The boy didn't flinch. "She is my home." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Clara Boone's head lifted at the sound of his voice. Her hair, matted and tangled, fell away from her face just enough for her eyes to find him. They were tired eyes, rimmed red from dust and tears. But when she saw him, something lit inside them, a spark that had been buried under days of fear. The sheriff's jaw tightened. "Your ma's been found guilty. Ain't no more to be said." But the boy's voice rose, stronger now. "Guilty of what? Of feeding me when no one else would? Of keeping me alive when my pa ran off and the town turned its back?" The words hit like stones. Some in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. Others stared at the ground. From the back, an old man spat into the dust. "Sheriff, maybe the boy's got a right to speak." The sheriff shot him a glare. "This ain't a debate, Hank." The court's done spoke, but the boy wasn't done. He took another step, now close enough that the sheriff could see the dirt under his fingernails, the sunburn on his cheeks. "You can whip her, Sheriff. You can break her skin, but you can't make me forget what she's done for me. And you can't make me believe she's the villain here." The crowd's silence deepened. Somewhere a horse snorted and stamped its hoof. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of dry earth and the faint tang of blood. Clara's lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came. Her hands, bound in front of her, trembled. Not from fear, but from something else. The sheriff's whip hung loose at his side now. His eyes flicked from the boy to the crowd, measuring the shift in the air. He could feel it. The moment was slipping from his control. And then from the far edge of the square, A voice called out, "Tell him, boy. Tell him what really happened that night." The boy turned toward the sound. It came from a woman in a faded blue dress, her face half hidden by a bonnet. She stood with her arms crossed, her gaze fixed on the sheriff like she'd been waiting for this moment. The boy swallowed hard. His chest rose and fell. And then he began to speak. Not in shouts now, but in the steady, deliberate tone of someone about to lay bare a truth the town had tried to bury. The boy's voice was steady now, but his hands were clenched into fists so tight his knuckles shone white. He looked from the sheriff to the crowd and then back to his mother. "You all think you know what happened," he began, his words slow, deliberate, like each one was being pulled from somewhere deep. "But you weren't there. You didn't see it. You didn't hear the wind that night, or smell the smoke before the fire took hold." A few people in the crowd shifted uneasily. The woman in the blue dress didn't move. Her eyes stayed locked on the boy, urging him on. "It was 3 nights ago," the boy continued. "The moon was just a sliver, and the wind was howling down from the ridge. Ma and me were in the cabin, trying to keep the fire from dying. We'd been low on wood for days. Pa's been gone near 2 years now, and no one in this town's lifted a finger to help us since." He glanced at the sheriff, and his voice hardened. "Not even you." The sheriff's jaw twitched, but he said nothing. "That's when we heard it," the boy went on. "A horse galloping hard, then another, then 3 more. Men's voices, low and mean. We blew out the lamp and Ma told me to stay quiet, but I peeked through the cracks in the wall." The boy's eyes darkened, and his voice dropped to almost a whisper. It was the McCallister brothers. All 3 of them. And they weren't alone. They had that drifter with them, the one folks call Red Jack. They were drunk, laughing, and they had sacks slung over their saddles. "Heavy sacks," the crowd murmured. Everyone knew the McCallisters, troublemakers, but with enough friends in town to keep them out of real trouble. "They stopped right outside our cabin," the boy said. "I heard one of them say, 'We'll stash it here. No one'll think to look in Boone's place.' Ma stepped outside before they could knock. She told him to get off our land, told him she didn't want no part of whatever they were carrying." He swallowed hard. "That's when Red Jack grabbed her by the arm. I saw his hand go to his belt. I thought he was gonna—" The boy's voice caught, and for a moment he couldn't speak. Clara's bound hands twitched, as if she wanted to reach for him. The woman in the blue dress took a step forward. "Go on, son," she said softly. The boy nodded, his voice trembling, but growing sharper with each word. "Ma fought him. She kicked him hard enough to make him let go. Then she grabbed the rifle from behind the door. She didn't fire, just told him to leave. But one of the sacks split open when they turned to go. Coins spilled out, gold coins. I'd never seen so much money in my life." The crowd's murmurs grew louder now. Gold meant trouble. Gold meant blood. "They left in a hurry," the boy said. But the next morning, the sheriff came. Said the McCallisters told him Ma had stolen the gold. Said they saw her take it from their saddlebags. They lied, and you believed them. The sheriff's face was unreadable, but his grip on the whip had loosened completely. The boy's voice rose, cutting through the murmurs. "You didn't search their place. You didn't ask me what happened. You just dragged her here, in front of everyone, to make an example out of her." A gust of wind swept through the square, lifting the dust into the air. It swirled around the whipping post, around Clara, around the boy who stood between her and the law. The woman in the blue dress spoke again, louder this time. "I saw them that night, too. I was coming back from the river. I saw the McCallisters riding hard, and I saw that sack split open. I saw the gold hit the dirt, and I saw Clara Boone standing in her doorway, holding that rifle, telling them to get off her land. The crowd erupted in whispers. Some faces turned toward the sheriff, others toward the saloon where the McCallisters were known to drink away their nights. The boy took a step closer to his mother. "You can whip her if you want, Sheriff, but you'll have to do it knowing the truth, and you'll have to do it in front of a town that now knows it too." The sheriff's eyes swept over the crowd. He could feel the shift, the weight of doubt pressing down on him. The law was only as strong as the people who believed in it, and right now that belief was slipping through his fingers like water. And somewhere in the back of the crowd, a shadow moved, a tall figure stepping out from the alley, the brim of his hat low, his boots silent on the dust. The boy didn't see him yet, neither did Clara, but the sheriff did, and his face went pale. The figure stepped out from the alley like a shadow, deciding it no longer wanted to hide. The brim of his hat was pulled low, but the sun caught the edge of his jaw. Sharp, unshaven, and dusted with the grit of the trail. His boots made no sound on the packed dirt, but every step seemed to pull the air tighter, like a rope winding around the whole square. The sheriff saw him first. His eyes narrowed, and for the first time that morning, his hand twitched toward the Colt at his hip. The boy noticed the change in the sheriff's face and turned. His breath caught. Clara Boone's head lifted too, and when her eyes found the man, her lips parted, not in fear, but in something closer to disbelief. The crowd began to murmur. Some recognized the way he moved, slow, deliberate, like a man who'd been in more than one gunfight and had walked away from all of them. Others recognized the scar that ran from his left ear down to the corner of his jaw, a pale reminder of a knife fight in a mining camp years back. It was Elias Boone, Clara's husband, the boy's father. The man everyone in Dry Creek thought was dead. He stopped just short of the whipping post, his shadow falling across Clara's bare feet. For a long moment he didn't speak. His eyes moved from the sheriff to the boy, to the rope marks on Clara's wrists. "Pa," the boy whispered, his voice breaking. Elias's gaze softened for just a heartbeat when it landed on his son, but then it hardened again as he turned to face the sheriff. "I hear," Elias said, his voice low but caring, "you've been laying hands on my wife." The sheriff's jaw worked. "She was found guilty, Boone." "You know the law." Elias took one slow step forward. "I know the law. I also know the McCallisters, and I know you've been taking their word over the truth since the day you pinned that badge to your chest." The crowd shifted. The tension was no longer just between the sheriff and the boy. It was between the sheriff and a man who had nothing left to lose. "I buried you," the sheriff said finally, his voice tight. "3 winters ago. Folks said you froze to death in the mountains." Elias's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "I froze all right, but I thawed out. And I've been watching this town from the edges ever since, watching what it's become." He turned his head slightly, his eyes sweeping over the faces in the crowd. "You all stood here ready to watch a woman whipped because 3 drunk thieves told you she was guilty. You didn't ask questions. You didn't look for the truth. You just came to see blood." A few people looked away. Others stared at the ground. Elias's voice dropped lower, but somehow it carried even more weight. "The gold the McCallisters were carrying? It wasn't theirs. It wasn't Clara's either. It came from the stagecoach they robbed 2 nights before. I know because I was tracking them. I saw them bury the rest of it out by Devil's Hollow. The sheriff's eyes flickered, just for a second, and Elias caught it. You knew, Elias said, his voice like a blade sliding from its sheath. You knew, and you let them walk free. You needed someone to take the blame so the stage line wouldn't pull their business from Dry Creek. And you picked my wife. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder now, sharper, like the first drops of a storm hitting dry ground. The boy stepped closer to his father, his small hand brushing against Elias's coat. Pa, are you going to stop them? Elias looked down at him, then back at Clara. Her eyes were wet, but her chin was high. I didn't come back to watch my family get torn apart, Elias said. I came back to end this. The sheriff's hand hovered near his gun. You draw on me, Boone, and you'll hang before sundown. Elias's eyes narrowed. If I draw, Sheriff, you won't see sundown. The square went silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. From somewhere behind the crowd, a voice shouted, The McCallisters are coming! Heads turned. Down the main street, 3 riders appeared, their horses kicking up dust, their faces twisted into grins that didn't reach their eyes, and slung over one of their saddles was a burlap sack that clinked with every step of the horse. The gold. The crowd parted as the riders approached, the tension in the square snapping into something sharper, something dangerous. Elias Boone didn't move. The sheriff didn't blink, and the boy standing between them realized the next few minutes would decide everything. His mother's fate, his father's life, and the truth this town had been running from. The McCallisters rode in like they owned the street. 3 horses, 3 men, and 1 sack of gold that clinked with every step. The sound was like a rattlesnake's warning. Sharp, metallic, and impossible to ignore. The crowd parted without a word. Folks didn't want to be in the way of the McCallisters, not when they were grinning like that. But those grins faltered when they saw who was standing in the square. Elias Boone, the eldest McCallister, Wade, pulled his horse to a stop, his eyes narrowing under the brim of his hat. Well, I'll be damned. Thought you were buzzard bones by now. Boone Elias didn't move. You've been thinking a lot of wrong things lately, Wade. The sheriff stepped forward, trying to reclaim control. McCallisters, you're riding in with stolen property. You best hand it over. Wade's grin returned, but it was thinner now. Stolen? This here's ours. Ain't that right, Sheriff? The sheriff hesitated, just for a breath, and that hesitation was all the crowd needed to see. A ripple of unease passed through them. Elias's voice cut in, low and steady. You gonna lie to them again, Sheriff? Or you gonna tell them you knew all along where that gold came from? The McCallisters shifted in their saddles. The youngest, Colt, spat into the dust. You talk too much for a dead man. Elias took a step forward, his boots crunching in the dirt. And you steal too much for a free one. The boy, his son, moved closer to his mother, his small hand gripping the rope that bound her wrists. Clara's eyes never left Elias. She knew that look in his face. It was the same one he'd worn the day he'd stood between her and a man with a knife in a mining camp years ago. The sheriff's hand hovered near his gun. Boone, I'm warning you. Elias's voice snapped like a whip. No, I'm warning you. This ends here. No more lies. No more scapegoats. You let them walk, you whip my wife, and you'll answer to me. The square was silent except for the restless shifting of horses. Then Wade McCallister laughed, a short, ugly sound. You think you can take all 3 of us, Boone? Elias's eyes didn't leave Wade's. I don't think. I know the moment stretched, taut as a drawn bowstring. The boy's heart pounded in his ears. The crowd leaned forward, caught between fear and the kind of hunger that comes from knowing they're about to see something they'll talk about for the rest of their lives. Wade's hand twitched toward his gun. Elias moved first. The draw was a blur, leather creaking, steel flashing in the sun. The first shot cracked through the square, echoing off the buildings. Wade's hat flew from his head as he toppled backward out of the saddle, hitting the ground hard. Colt's gun cleared leather, but Elias was already turning. The second shot punched into Colt's shoulder, spinning him sideways in the saddle before he crashed into the dust. His horse bolted, disappearing down the street. The third McCallister, Jeb, froze with his hand halfway to his gun. Elias's eyes locked on him. "Don't," he said, and something in his voice made Jeb's hand fall away from the grip. The sheriff's gun was still in its holster. His face was pale, his eyes darting between the fallen McCallisters and the crowd that was now watching him. Elias stepped toward him. "Untie her!" The sheriff didn't move. "I said untie her!" The sheriff's hands shook as he pulled the knot loose. The rope fell away from Clara's wrists, leaving angry red marks. She rubbed them slowly, her eyes never leaving her husband's face. The boy rushed to her, wrapping his arms around her waist. She bent down, holding him tight, her chin resting on his hair. Elias turned to the crowd. "You all saw it. You all heard it. The McCallisters robbed that stagecoach." The sheriff knew. "My wife's name is cleared. No one argued. No one dared." The woman in the blue dress stepped forward, her voice caring. "I'll testify to every word. And I reckon I'm not the only one here who will." A few heads nodded, then more. The tide had turned. Elias looked back at the sheriff. "You've got a choice. Arrest them or ride out of town and don't come back." The sheriff's jaw worked, but he knew the fight was gone. He turned to the McCallisters. "You're under arrest." As the sheriff led them away, the crowd began to break apart, murmuring in low voices. Some glanced at Elias with something like respect. Others just looked relieved the storm had passed. Clara stepped toward Elias, her eyes searching his. "I thought you were gone." "I was," he said quietly, "but I couldn't stay gone. Not when I heard what they were doing to you." The boy looked up at him. "Are you staying this time?" Elias crouched down, resting a hand on his son's shoulder. "If you'll have me." The boy didn't answer with words. He just threw his arms around his father's neck and held on. The sun was lower now, casting long shadows across the square. The dust was settling. The gold would be returned. The McCallisters would face justice, and the name Boone would no longer be spoken in whispers. As they walked away together, father, mother, and son, the town of Dry Creek watched them go. And for the first time in a long time, the air felt lighter, because sometimes in the West, justice didn't come from the law. It came from the ones who refused to be erased.